Thanks for joining us today on Envision, where we are talking school attendance boundaries. We know this is a hot topic because we have a lot of students continue to grow. We're going to have some new buildings coming online, some additional space in other buildings. And so the boundary conversation, it's always a tough one. But we've been preparing our community and talking about that. Now it's time to get to work.
It is.
Yeah.
It's almost decision-making time. When you think back, leading up to conversations, leading up to the bond, just over a year ago now, when you think about those conversations, a question we frequently received was, "Will you have to change boundaries?" And the answer always was,
Yep.
"Yes, we will." We have to. When you look at it just from a practical standpoint, the community said yes to a $190 million bond issue, and they provided us a monetary resource that we're changing into a physical resource in the form of new buildings, new additions, new renovations. When you think about that, then our charge is to make sure that the kids are distributed equally and equitably, but equally in those resources. Now that's oversimplification, so, well, that's simple. Until you bring in, well, this is my school, this has always been my school,
Right.
and that's where I want to go to school.
I want to be a insert mascot.
Right. I was asked at a meeting at the YPN group, the Young Professionals Network group here in the community, about, well, what would you say to somebody that's, I want to be a warrior, my brother was a warrior, my dad was a warrior, I want to be a Washington warrior. And I said flippantly, I'll give them a green pom-pom and say, well, now you're a Cavalier. That's for Thomas Jefferson. Obviously, it won't be that simple. Over time, it will be. Over time, it will be. But in the short term, I think there are some things that we must do as a school district. The first must is we must put a process together that makes sense for putting boundaries together. That's the first must. The second must is we really need to listen to the community on this topic. And so our process is going to look very much like the process did for the bond election, where the school district will gather data. We're in that phase right now. What do the buildings show in terms of enrollment? What do projections look like in terms of what our enrollment will look like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road? The city of Sioux Falls is a wonderful partner in that regard, so we can look at the developments and see where the kids are going to come from. And once we get all that work done, we'll hand that off to a task force when we flip the calendar to 2020. So not next school year, but next calendar year. In January of this school year, we'll put a task force together of about 20 to 30 people and put this data in front of them and ask them to come up with some options. They'll meet 3 times, January and February.
Yeah.
And during those 3 meetings, they'll go over a lot of stuff. And I hope much like the bond election, heading into the bond election, I knew that there were some things that I thought we had to do as a district. But what we came up with as a plan was far superior to anything I would have come up with individually. And I think that'll be the case when we include the community in the dialogue as to what these new boundaries need to look like. We'll begin that with 3 task force meetings. From there, we'll go to 5 community meetings where we share with the entire community the results of the task force. And I don't know if that'll be an option or several options. And then from there, we'll take that information in April to the Board of Education. And in April and May, our Board of Education will have that information, probably get lobbied heavily by people in the community. That will be the downside of being a board member at that time.
Right.
The upside will be this is not a rushed decision. This is something that they're already fully aware of that's coming their way. They will be totally engaged in the task force process. They'll be totally engaged in the community engagement process. And then in the end, they'll make a decision in June of 2020. So about 8 or 9 months from now, we'll have a decision made as to what the boundaries will be. And those boundaries won't go into effect for a year after the decision. And the purpose for that is we want everybody to get comfortable with what the decision is. hopefully we won't change the decision between June of 2020
Right.
and June of 2021, but everybody will have some comfort level as to what the new reality is, and maybe some appreciation for all the work that went in to getting that. By the time we get to 2022, 23, 24, it'll be a thing of the past, but I'm not naive enough to think that there won't be some emotion that's charged into a situation that also will be driven by some logic.
Right, and that logic has to do with, as I've heard you say, we don't want kids walking across the interstate, you know, those natural barriers like the Big Sioux River and a variety. So safety obviously comes into play as well. And so there are just a lot of different factors, and then you throw the emotions in that aren't necessarily tied to facts necessarily. It's just where your heart is, and it does become a difficult conversation, but one that's necessary and one that we'll implement and take our time listening to.
Sometimes you can make a decision without looking at the individuals involved, and the decisions that you come up with are really pretty easy decisions to make. But then when you look into a face, that decision gets a lot tougher, and there'll be a lot of faces impacted by the decisions that will have to be made next spring.
Right, right. Again, all for the good of the students so that we can provide the best education possible, and we're not overloading one school and underloading another. And so always the work is done with the students, the best interest of the students in mind. So thanks for joining us today on Envision.